During my 50th birthday party, my three sons unveiled a special presentation, a compilation of every major failure in my life, narrated by my ex-wife. "Let's talk about the time he missed our son's graduation," she said. I stood up and replied, because I was in a coma after saving someone's life. Suddenly, everyone was quiet. Then my youngest started applauding. 50 years. Half a century. That's how long I had been on this earth. I figured that was worth celebrating. I never asked for a big party, but my sons insisted. They said it was time to acknowledge everything I'd done for the family. "Dad, you deserve a night just for you." Those were Ryan's exact words when he called me a month before the big day. "Come on, Dad. We got it all planned. Food, drinks, people you haven't seen in years. It's going to be special." I hesitated. I wasn't a party kind of guy. Never had been. But they were excited, and I didn't want to be the old man who couldn't take a little attention for once. So I said yes. That was my mistake. The party was held at a nice little venue in downtown Chicago. Not too fancy, but classy enough that I felt like I should have worn something other than my usual blazer and button-down. The moment I walked in, I was surprised. They really went all out, silver and navy streamers, a slideshow of old photos on a projector, round table set with candles and folded napkins. People clapped when I walked in. My old firefighting buddies, some family I hadn't seen in years, even a few guys from the auto shop I'd been working at since retirement. It felt good. Andrew, my youngest, was the first to greet me. "Happy birthday, Dad." He handed me a glass of bourbon with a smirk. "Thanks, kid." I took a sip. "You guys really pulled out all the stops, huh?" Ryan, my oldest, came over and clapped me on the back. "Well, it's a big deal. 50's a milestone. It's just another number," I said, though I appreciated the effort. Ryan grinned. "Well, you're going to love what we've got planned." That should have been my first warning. Dinner was good. A nice steak, mashed potatoes, some fancy vegetables I didn't recognize but ate anyway. Conversations buzzed around me. People reminiscing about old times, catching up, laughing. Then Ryan stood up. He tapped his glass with a fork. "All right, everyone, we have something special for Dad." The room quieted. The lights dimmed. I leaned back in my chair, expecting a slideshow of embarrassing baby pictures or a few jokes at my expense. That was normal for these kind of things, right? I was wrong. The screen flickered, and my ex-wife's face appeared. I was tense. "Let's talk about the time he missed our son's graduation." Margaret's voice rang through the speakers. Laughter, scattered at first, then growing. My stomach dropped. Ryan's voice narrated over a video montage. Dad had a history of not showing up. Take Andrew's high school graduation. A big moment, right? Except Dad never made it. More laughter. My breathing slowed. My hands curled into fists under the table. Then the screen cut to Margaret again, shaking her head with a pitying smile. We waited and waited. No call, no text. Andrew was devastated. I turned to Andrew, but he was staring at the table, avoiding my gaze. The video kept playing. Clips of other failures. The vacation I canceled after losing my job. I missed Christmas when I had been stuck at the fire station covering for a guy whose wife was dying. And then, Margaret's voice again. But my personal favorite? The time he missed Ryan's college graduation. My chest tightened. The audience chuckled. I pushed back my chair and stood. Because I was in a coma. Silence. The laughter died instantly. Ryan blinked. "What?" I clenched my jaw, scanning the room. "You want to know why I missed your graduation?" My voice was low but firm. Because 3 days before, I was coming home from a shift when I saw a car flipped over on I-90. A woman and her daughter were trapped inside. I pulled them out. But before I could get out of the way, a drunk driver slammed into us. I spent 2 weeks in the ICU. A few gasps. Margaret's lips parted slightly. I exhaled sharply. "You think I wasn't there for you? You think I wanted to miss those moments?" My voice shook. I worked double shifts to put food on the table. I sacrificed sleep, my health, my damn body to keep you safe. And this is what you think of me. A slow clap echoed in the room. Andrew. He stood up and kept clapping. Then a few of my old colleagues joined in. My childhood friend, Mike, too. Margaret shot up, her face red. "Oh, come on. Let's not pretend he's a saint. He's still what?" I snapped. "Made mistakes? Yeah, Margaret, I did. But this was cruel." Her mouth closed. Ryan ran a hand through his hair, staring at his feet. We didn't know." I swallowed hard. "No, you didn't bother to ask." The party ended awkwardly. People left in murmurs. Some patted my back, whispering apologies they had no business giving. My sons, they didn't know what to say. I walked out alone. For a long time, I stood in the parking lot, staring at the city lights. I had spent 50 years trying to be the kind of man my family could rely on. And yet, when the moment came, they had chosen to believe the worst of me. I had thought my sacrifices meant something. That love, even when it was messy, was enough. Maybe I was wrong. Or maybe it was time to start living for myself. I didn't go straight home. After leaving the venue, I just drove. The city stretched out around me, lights blurring in my tired vision. I wasn't sure where I was headed, but I knew I couldn't sit alone in my apartment after that disaster. The humiliation sat heavy in my chest. My own sons, my own damn sons, had put together a whole damn show to mock me, and they hadn't even bothered to get the facts straight. A tribute to my failures. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. At some point, I ended up at an old diner on West Madison, the kind of place that's been around forever. The kind of place where no one asks questions. The neon sign flickers as I pull into the nearly empty lot. Inside, it smelled like burnt coffee and fried food. I took a seat at the counter, nodding to the waitress, an older woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Donna. "What can I get you, hon?" "Just coffee," I muttered. She poured it without another word. I stared at the black liquid, the steam curling into the dim light. My mind replayed the looks on my sons' faces. The laughter. The moment they realized they had screwed up. I should have been furious. Hell, I was furious. But under that, beneath all the anger and betrayal, there was something else. A deep, crushing sadness. How had it come to this? How had I ended up so alienated from the people I love the most? I ran a hand down my face, exhaustion settling in. "You look like you just walked out of a war," Donna said, wiping down the counter in front of me. I let out a dry laugh. Something like that. She leaned on the counter, eyeing me with curiosity, but not pushing. "You got kids?" "3," I said. The word felt bitter in my mouth. "Ah." She nodded like that explained everything. "They disappoint you?" I huffed a humorless chuckle. "Tonight? More than ever." She didn't pry, just refilled my coffee and let me sit in silence. The diner door jingled as someone walked in. I didn't pay attention until I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Dad." I turned. It was Andrew. I stared at him for a long moment, not sure if I wanted to hear whatever he had to say. He looked uncertain, shifting on his feet like a kid caught sneaking out past curfew. "How'd you find me?" I asked, my voice flat. He held up his phone. "You still have your location on, right?" I had set that up years ago, back when they were teenagers. I turned back to my coffee. "What do you want?" He hesitated. Then, cautiously, he sat on the stool beside me. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We screwed up." I didn't respond. He exhaled again. I don't even know what to say, Dad. I didn't know. None of us did. And we just went along with it. I guess we thought." He shook his head. "It doesn't matter what we thought. It was wrong. And I'm sorry." I stared into my coffee, letting his words settle. "Did Ryan send you?" I asked. "No," he said quickly. He's still trying to wrap his head around everything. "I came because," he swallowed, "because I feel like crap, Dad." I studied with him. His face was open, genuine. This wasn't an excuse. This was guilt. I sighed. "You think that little video was funny?" His shoulders slumped. "Not anymore." I scoffed. "You and your brothers painted me as some deadbeat. Do you have any idea what that felt like? Sitting there, watching my whole life be turned into a goddamn joke." He looked down at the counter. "I do now." I shook my head, anger flaring again. "You should have asked me, Andrew. You should have at least given me the chance to explain. Instead, you just, what? Took your mother's version of events and ran with it." He flinched. "She's been bitter for years," I continued. "And I let it go because I didn't want to fight. But I never thought my own kids would believe the worst of me without question." He let out a shaky breath. "We never really talked about the past, Dad. You never told us. I didn't think I had to." I snapped. "I thought you knew me better than that." Andrew's eyes were glassy when he looked at me again. "I thought I did too." That stopped me. He wiped a hand over his face, sighing. "Dad, I feel sick about it. I do. And I don't know how to fix it. But I'm here. I'm not going to pretend an apology makes it all better. But I had to come and say something." I stared at him for a long time. The truth was, I wanted to stay mad. I wanted to throw his apology back in his face and tell him that one conversation in a diner wasn't enough to fix 20 years of misunderstandings. But then I saw him, the boy I raised. Not the man sitting next to me, but the kid who used to fall asleep on my chest when he was 5. The teenager who called me after his first heartbreak. The young man who, up until that night, I thought still looked up to me. And despite everything, I still loved him. That was the worst part of being a father. No matter how much they hurt you, you still love them. I sighed and leaned back. "Are you hungry?" Andrew looked up, surprised. Yeah, I guess." I nodded toward Donna. "2 burgers, extra fries." She smirked and walked off to put in the order. Andrew relaxed slightly. We weren't okay. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. But at least he was here. At least he was trying. The food arrived, and we ate in relative silence. The only sounds were the occasional clinking of forks against plates and the distant hum of conversation from the other side of the diner. Andrew kept glancing at me like he wanted to say something, but every time he opened his mouth, he just sighed and took another bite of his burger. I let him sit with it. I wasn't going to make it easy for him. Finally, after he had polished off his fries, he wiped his hands on a napkin and leaned forward. "Dad, do you ever think maybe we never really knew each other?" I looked up from my coffee, raising an eyebrow. "What the hell kind of question is that?" He sighed. "I mean it. You were always working. Mom told us what she wanted us to hear, and we just believed it. We thought we knew the whole story. He paused, rubbing the back of his neck. I feel like I grew up looking at you through a dirty window, only seeing what was easiest to see. I let his words settle before responding. You were kids. You didn't know better. But I should have. His jaw tightened. I should have asked questions. I should have, I don't know, thought for myself instead of taking everything at face value. I exhaled through my nose. Yeah, maybe. He blinked at me. That's it. I shrugged. What else do you want me to say? I don't know. He slumped in his seat. I guess I just want to fix it. I don't want things to be weird between us. I sighed and leaned back. You don't just fix something like this, Andrew. It takes time. Trust. He nodded, looking down at his hands. Yeah, I get that. We sat in silence for a few more minutes. Then Andrew spoke again, his voice quieter this time. Do you ever regret it? Regret what? Everything. He gestured vaguely. The job, the sacrifices, giving up time with us. Do you ever wonder if it was all worth it? I looked at him for a long time. Did I regret it? Did I regret the nights I missed? The birthdays I had to celebrate late? The times I came home exhausted, smelling like smoke, barely able to keep my eyes open? Did I regret saving that woman and her daughter? I picked up my coffee and took a slow sip before answering. No, Andrew exhaled. Not even a little? I shook my head. I did what I thought was right. Every single time. I never half-assed being your father, Andrew. Maybe I wasn't around as much as you wanted me to be, but I was never absent because I didn't care. He swallowed hard. I know that now. Another beat of silence. Then he shifted in his seat. What was it like? What? Being in the fire department. I studied with him. You never asked before. Yeah, he admitted. I guess I always thought of it as something separate from us. Like, that's Dad's thing, you know? He rubbed the back of his neck. But after tonight, I've been thinking a lot about it. What meant to you? Why did you stay in it so long, even when it cost you so much? I looked down at my hands, running my thumb over an old burn scar on my palm. There's something about it, I finally said. Knowing you're doing something that matters. That when someone's having the worst day of their life, you can be the one to make it better. I trailed off, searching for the right words. It's a hard thing to walk away from. Andrew nodded slowly. I remember when I was little, he said after a moment. I used to think you were a superhero. I blinked, caught off guard. He smiled faintly. I really did. You come home all covered in soot and looking exhausted, but I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. I used to brag to my friends, my dad runs into burning buildings. I huffed a quiet laugh. Yeah. His expression sobered. Somewhere along the way, I forgot about that. I didn't respond. Then he exhaled and sat up straighter. So what happens now? I rubbed a hand over my jaw. That depends. I met his gaze. On whether your brothers are man enough to own up to what they did. Andrew winced. Ryan's a stubborn bastard. But I'll talk to him. I nodded, finishing the last of my coffee. Andrew hesitated before speaking again. And what about Mom? I gave him a look. I don't give a damn about what your mother thinks anymore. He chuckled. Yeah, fair. We sat there for a while longer. And for the first time in years, I felt like my son was actually seeing me. Not the version of me Margaret had crafted. Not the image they had built in their heads. But me. And maybe, just maybe, that was a start. Andrew and I sat in that diner for nearly 2 hours, picking at the last of our fries and sipping on lukewarm coffee. It was strange sitting across from my son and actually talking, not just about what happened that night, but about real things. His job, his life. Apparently, he'd been dating someone for the past year, a woman named Camille. He was nervous about taking the next step with her. I don't know if I want to get married, he admitted, stirring the remnants of his coffee. I look at how things turn out with you and Mom, and he hesitated. It's hard to believe in it, you know? I sighed, rubbing my temple. Marriage isn't the problem, Andrew. People are the problem. He considered that, nodding slowly. Maybe. I wanted to tell him that love was worth the risk, that the good outweighed the bad, but the truth was I wasn't sure I believed that myself anymore. I had loved Margaret once. I had loved her enough to give her 3 sons, to work myself to the bone to make sure she never had to worry about money, to miss birthdays and anniversaries, because I believed I was doing the right thing for our family. And how did she repay me? By turning my own kids against me. The anger simmered beneath the surface again, but I pushed it down. I was too damn tired to dwell on it. Andrew must have sensed my shift in mood because he changed the subject. Are you still working at the shop? Yeah, I muttered. It's something to do. Pay the bills. He smirked. You always did love cars. I grunted in response. That was another thing my sons never asked me about. They never asked why I spent my weekends elbow deep in grease, rebuilding engines that weren't mine, restoring old cars that I had no intention of driving. It was the one thing I had control over. Engines made sense. They either worked or they didn't. People were a hell of a lot more complicated. It was well past midnight when we finally left the diner. The air was crisp, carrying the last bite of winter as we stepped into the nearly empty parking lot. Andrew shoved his hands into his jacket pockets, rocking back on his heels. Guess I should head home. I nodded, unlocking my truck. He hesitated. You gonna be okay? I gave him a tired smirk. Kid, I've survived worse. He let out a soft laugh. Yeah, I guess you have. For a moment, he just stood there, shifting his weight like he wanted to say something but couldn't quite find the words. Then, to my surprise, he stepped forward and pulled me into a quick, firm hug. I froze for a second before clapping him on the back. When he pulled away, he looked almost embarrassed. Yeah, so, I'll call you tomorrow. I raised an eyebrow. You actually mean that? Or, is this one of those I'll call you things where I don't hear from you for another 6 months? He winced. I deserve that. You do. But no, he promised. I'll call. And I'll talk to Ryan. Try to, I don't know, make him see things differently. I nodded, though I wasn't holding my breath. Ryan had always been the most like his mother, stubborn, proud, unwilling to admit when he was wrong. Still, the fact that Andrew was making the effort meant something. He gave me a small, hesitant smile before heading to his car. I watched him pull out of the lot, his taillights fading into the night. For the first time since the party, I didn't feel entirely alone. But there was still unfinished business. Because while Andrew had come to his senses, Ryan and Margaret were a different story. And I wasn't about to let this go. The next morning, I woke up with a headache that had nothing to do with alcohol and everything to do with the weight of the night before. I lay in bed for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, trying to decide what the hell I was supposed to do now. Andrew had reached out. That was something. But Ryan? And Margaret? No, that wasn't going to slide. I wasn't the type to sit back and let people walk all over me. Not anymore. Margaret had spent years poisoning my sons against me, twisting the truth until I was nothing but the villain in their story. And Ryan, well, Ryan had been all too happy to believe it. He led the damn ambush at my party, embarrassing me in front of friends and family without a second thought. They wanted to make a spectacle out of my failures? Fine, let's make a spectacle out of the truth. I spent the next few days thinking everything through. If I was going to get my revenge, it wasn't going to be some petty insult or a heated argument that went nowhere. No, I wanted something better, something public, something undeniable. So I started making some calls. First, to Mike, a longtime friend and retired journalist. Think you can help me out with a little storytelling project? Then, to a buddy of mine from the fire department, now working in PR. How hard would it be to get an article in the paper? Something local, nothing crazy. And finally, to Andrew, I need you to get Ryan to dinner. My treat. The pieces were coming together. A week later, we met at Bruno's Steakhouse, a nice, mid-range place in the city, just neutral enough that no one could claim I had picked my turf. Ryan showed up with that same smug expression, like he was doing me a favor by being there. Margaret wasn't far behind, acting like she was about to sit in on a board meeting rather than a family dinner. Andrew was already seated, shifting uncomfortably. He knew what was coming, at least partially. I leaned back in my chair as the waiter poured us water. Glad you could make it. Ryan scoffed. Yeah, well, Andrew wouldn't shut up about it. Margaret sniffed. If this is about that little incident at your party, I think we all just need to move on. I smirked. Oh, don't worry. I'm all about moving forward. She rolled her eyes. Then let's not drag this out. I took a sip of my water, feeling the calm before the storm. Tell me something, Margaret. Have you ever heard of the Chicago Tribune? She frowned. Of course. Ryan looked confused. What does that have to do with anything? I slid my phone across the table. The screen was open to an article titled, Heroism and Misunderstanding, a Firefighter's Story. Ryan grabbed the phone and started reading. Margaret peered over his shoulder. As her eyes moved down the screen, her expression changed from mild irritation to shock. I kept my voice casual. Turns out, people like a good redemption story. Especially when the villain turns out to be the guy who spent 25 years running into burning buildings while his family wrote him off as a failure. Ryan's jaw clenched. Margaret's face turned an impressive shade of red. You wrote this? I chuckled. Nope. Someone else did. A reporter thought it was an interesting story. See, I told a few people what really happened all those years, how I missed Ryan's graduation because I was in a coma after saving 2 lives, how I worked double shifts so my kids could have everything they needed, how I sacrificed time, health, and relationships all for a family that decided to publicly humiliate me. Ryan tossed the phone onto the table. This is bullcrap. I raised an eyebrow. Is it? Andrew, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke. I talked to some of Dad's old co-workers. His voice was quiet but firm. Everything checks out, Ryan. Ryan shook his head. It doesn't change anything. He still wasn't there. Because he was working to take care of us. Andrew snapped. Jesus, Ryan, do you not get it? We crucified him for doing his job, for trying to keep us fed, keep the house running. We bought into everything Mom said without even asking him for his side of the story. Ryan's lips pressed into a thin line. Margaret huffed, crossing her arms. I was the one who raised you boys. I was the one who was there. I nodded, and I never once disrespected you for that. Not once. I never told them you were a bad mother. But you? You made sure they thought I was a bad father. Her jaw tightened. I told them the truth. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. No, you told them your version of the truth. And now, the real truth is out. And people know it. Ryan snorted. What? You think one article is going to change everything? I smiled. Oh, that's just the beginning. I pulled out my phone again, flipping to another screen. See, after the article went live, I got a call from a producer over at WGN News. They want to do a segment. They think it's a compelling story. Family, betrayal, redemption. I took a slow sip of my drink. And you know what the best part is? I didn't even reach out to them. They found me. Margaret's fork clattered against her plate. Ryan's face paled. Andrew just let out a low whistle. So, I continued. If you two want to keep pushing this deadbeat dad narrative, be my guest. But just know that every time you do, there will be a growing list of people who know the truth. Margaret stood up abruptly, grabbing her purse. This is pathetic. If you want to make yourself a martyr, be my guest, but I won't be part of it. She stormed out without another word. Ryan stayed seated, glaring at me. I met his gaze evenly. You made your bed, son. Now you get to lie in it. For the first time, I saw something crack behind his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or just the weight of realization finally sinking in. He pushed back his chair. I need time. I nodded. Take all the time you need. And then he left, too. Andrew and I sat there in silence for a long moment. Finally, he shook his head and chuckled. Damn, Dad, you really went nuclear. I smirked, taking another sip of my drink. They wanted a show. I gave them one. Andrew raised his glass. To revenge. I clinked my glass against his. To justice.